Hello everyone and welcome. In this video we're going to be talking about SKYACTIV-X, Mazda's revolutionary new engine, which they say they're going to be implementing in the year 2019 as a part of their overall vision looking out towards the year 2030, which they are calling Sustainable Zoom Zoom 2030. I'm not making that up. That's the ridiculous name that they came up with. But anyways, the name is silly. The technology is not. The technology is very cool. So the engine basically is running HCCI, homogeneous charge compression ignition. And this is kind of the holy grail of gasoline engines because it's the best of both worlds when comparing a gasoline and a diesel engine. So a quick overview of how this works. I do have a separate video explaining HCCI engines, but what Mazda is doing is a bit different. So a gasoline engine has a homogeneous charge, meaning you've got air and fuel mixed in there, and you ignite that air and fuel with a spark. A diesel engine controls ignition by when it injects fuel. So you're using compression ultimately to ignite it. You inject in that fuel and the temperature and pressure is hot enough that that fuel ignites as it's sprayed into the cylinder. Now, homogeneous charge compression and ignition engines have that mixture of air and fuel already in there of gasoline, and as it's compressing, that pressure from compression is what ignites that air and fuel mixture. Now, as you can imagine, timing is going to be more challenging with this because you can't control timing with a spark or when you inject fuel. It's simply based on the temperature inside of this chamber. And when that temperature reaches the point that it can ignite everything, everything ignites, mixed with that pressure. And so the challenge is, of course, controlling that internal temperature. So you can use EGR to regulate it. There's different methods. You can use valve timing in order to regulate the temperature within there and make sure you have good timing to be able to use this feature. So the biggest challenge with HCCI engines is, of course, controlling that internal temperature and making sure you have the range where HCCI is possible. If it's too cold, you run into ignition problems. Cold starts are a great example. If it gets too hot, you start to have engine knock, unpredictable timing, and you don't want that to occur either. Now, Mazda said, wait a minute, we don't have to have this all or nothing engine. How do we fix this range? Well, you throw in a spark plug. So you kind of go back to the old way of just a traditional gasoline engine, and that's how they solve this issue of, for example, a cold start. If you have super cold ambient temperatures, which aren't conducive to having this HCCI function running, if you're at really high load, high RPM, you can use a spark ignition to make sure that your timing is perfect. When you're cruising down the highway, when you have low load scenarios and you want ultimate efficiency, you can switch into this HCCI mode where now you have a much more efficient. Mazda says that it's 20 to 30% more fuel efficient than their current SKYACTIV gasoline engines. So a huge efficiency improvement, when they're able to run this method of combustion. Now, this is basically what we know. And over here is more speculation on my part because Mazda hasn't released all that much information about this engine. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's kind of cool to think about the ways that they're going to be controlling this engine. Some of this stuff we do know, some of it we don't, and I'll kind of work through it. But basically, when this engine is running in a gasoline mode, what I would imagine they're doing is lowering the effective compression ratio. So when you're running the engine on compression ignition, you want a higher compression ratio to be able to ignite that air-fuel mixture. Now, they haven't released what their compression ratio is. There's some sources out there saying it's 18:1. Mazda doesn't have it directly stated, but let's just assume it's 18:1 when it's running in this HCCI mode. In the gasoline mode, where you're using a spark to ignite it, you're going to lower the effective compression ratio by opening up that intake valve during the compression stroke. And this is what they do with their current SKYACTIV engines. It's called the Atkinson cycle, and so it allows you to have a lower compression ratio and then a higher expansion ratio, which is an efficient way to run it. But of course, if you had, for example, an 18:1 compression ratio, you would have knock and pre-ignition problems. And so in order to mitigate those issues, you lower the effective compression ratio by leaving that intake valve open during compression and then have less air and fuel overall to combust. And you're also going to run at a richer or a stoichiometric air-fuel ratio. And Mazda has announced that these engines will be supercharged. So you're kind of going to get the best of both worlds where you can have power when you really want it, and then you can be super efficient when you don't need that power and run it into this homogeneous charge compression ignition mode. Now, one of the benefits of this compression ignition method is that you're able to run super lean air-fuel ratios, leaner than you otherwise could run and ignite with a spark. A spark wouldn't be enough to ignite it. You need these higher temperatures and higher pressures from compression in order to ignite that air-fuel ratio. And so this allows them to run, this is what gives you that major boost in efficiency. You're running super lean, you've got a high compression ratio, and overall you're going to get a 20 to 30% more fuel efficient engine as a result. Now, Mazda stated there are two major challenges with this type of engine. The first is this range, as we talked about earlier, and the way they really address that is with a spark plug. But that introduces the second issue, which is how do you switch between spark and compression ignition and have that be seamless and smooth. And they haven't really said how they've done this, but they have stated that there is this method of how this engine can run where you use the spark plug to control compression. And I'm guessing that that is part of how they're addressing this seamless switch between when they're running it on spark versus when they're running it on compression. So how this works is, this kind of intermediary mode is when you're compressing that air and fuel mixture, the spark is going to start the combustion. So you're going to have, a somewhat richer air fuel mixture that can have a spark ignite it. The spark's going to start the ignition, and then that flame front is going to start to expand out. So as that flame propagation is expanding outward, it's going to be increasing the pressure in the entire cylinder. As you increase pressure in the entire cylinder, you increase the temperature as well. And so all of the rest of the cylinder reaches a pressure and a temperature at which everything simultaneously combusts. And so the spark plug is controlling the timing of compression ignition. SKYACTIV-X. So that's where SKYACTIV-X comes from. And I believe that that's probably something to do with their switch between using compression to ignite versus using a spark to ignite it. So thank you guys for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below.